Legend of Exorcism. Chapter 37. Coming Prepared. In the rear hall of Xingqing Palace, Hung Jun and Li Jinglong were squeezed to the point where the bones throughout their whole bodies ached immensely, as if their internal organs were about to get squeezed out. Hung Jun once again lifted his hand to wave his blade, but ultimately he had no strength left. Zhenshi. Wait, Li Jinglong said with great difficulty. You see, this sea of blood is living. I'm being squeezed so hard I'm going to vomit, Hung Jun said painfully. There was no way he could focus his attention on anything. When Li Jinglong activated the heart lamp and shone it down upon that sea of blood, the areas of fresh blood the heart lamp's light touched would grow lighter in color, and the surrounding regions would grow darker and darker. He had no way to tell if these were ghostly shadows caused by the light, or if this sea of blood actually felt terror towards the heart lamp. In a bit, gather up all of your energy, and push the pentacolor sacred light outwards, Li Jinglong eked out brokenly. Hung Jun exhaled the last breath of air he had in his lungs. Li Jinglong's face had already turned greenish-purple from holding his breath in, and his gaze began to grow unfocused. Their chests were pressed tightly against each other, but the sea of blood continued to collapse inwards and crush the pentacolor sacred light. Li Jinglong, are you ready? Hung Jun already couldn't speak any longer. They were squeezed very tightly together in an extremely narrow space, but just then, Li Jinglong exerted all his strength and sucked in a deep breath, and his chest began to shine with light. Where the light of the heart lamp reached, the color of the blood sea seemed to undergo some strange change. The light shone down, and as soon as it touched the dark regions, they would retreat rapidly. Li Jinglong circulated the heart lamp down to his two hands, and his hands began to shine with light as he pointed them into the sea of blood. As the light expanded, those smears of dark-colored regions began to slowly gather up, avoiding the fan-shaped region created by the white light, gathering up in one spot behind Li Jinglong's back. Right now! Li Jinglong shouted loudly. With the last of his strength, Hung Jun suddenly caused the pentacolor sacred light to expand outwards. In that instant, light shot out in all directions through the blood sea, and the pentacolor sacred light was like Pangu separating the heavens and the earth in the midst of the primordial chaos, forcibly creating a space within this blood sea. But Hung Jun's mana was already at its limit, and he could only barely manage to lift it up a few chi before he felt the blood sea sweep towards him like a tsunami. Just as the sacred light was being pushed to its limit, Li Jinglong unsheathed the sword of wisdom on his back. He pulled it out, pushing Hung Jun in the opposite direction as he borrowed that momentum to rush out of the protective barrier of the pentacolor sacred light, stabbing the sword of wisdom in his hand into that dark-colored region. The sword of wisdom exploded with powerful light, and black smoke billowed up in the midst of the blood sea. The instant that dark region was pierced through, the entire sea of blood exploded, boiling upwards, before collapsing back down with a hong. Hung Jun fell heavily on the ground, choking on a mouthful of coppery blood. But as he struggled, he saw Li Jinglong wield the sword of wisdom with both hands as black smoke coiled around the blade. It swiftly burned away under that strong light, evaporating to nothing in the end. A pained howl issued from the black smoke, as if some soul that had been imprisoned within was released, before the sea of blood lost its shape and flowed out in all directions like a tidal wave. Hung Jun staggered to his feet, panting non-stop. Li Jinglong tottered over on unsteady feet, reaching out a hand to grab his arm, steadying him as he lifted him up. Let's go. Li Jinglong turned his head and spoke. It must be near here. On the star observation platform, the dark clouds crowded densely around, and the rain stopped. Yang Yahuan laid in the center of the platform, completely unconscious. The seven-tailed fox lowered its head, its mouth emitting wave upon wave of white light that enshrouded Yang Yahuan's entire body. With his glaive in hand, Hung Jun walked step by step onto the deck. After the seven-tailed fox had lost a tail, its wound had yet to heal, and blood still dripped down. Between it and Yang Yahuan was some sort of mysterious connection. When he got close, Hung Jun realized that white light was actually flowing unceasingly from Yang Yehuan's body into the mouth of the seven-tailed fox Yao. It enveloped the fox's entire body before turning into a pillar of light, shooting towards the heavens. "Fox Yao, release her," Hung Jun said darkly, holding his glaive blade down. Until this moment, the fox Yao hadn't noticed Hung Jun's approach. It whipped its head around, letting out a howl, before it pounced at Hung Jun. Hung Jun immediately blocked it with the pentacolor sacred light. At the same time, Li Jinglong clambered onto the observation platform. He hid himself behind the stone railings, holding his sword of wisdom in hand as he observed that Fox Yao's every move. "You actually defeated my child," the Fox Yao asked, trembling. "That sea of blood was your child?" Hung Jun asked slowly. "It's already been destroyed by me." The fur on the Fox Yao's entire body rose, and it said, its voice shaking, "It is what it is, son of Kong Xian. I imagine you only came for those 3 flat-furred domestic pets. Whose vile spawn you are is no longer important." Hung Jun roared angrily, his voice filled with menace, "Who exactly are you?" But the Fox Yao began to chuckle coldly, letting go of imperial concubine Yang still lying on the ground. At the same time, the carp Yao, its mouth open, climbed up onto the platform from the other side. Li Jinglong hurried to gesture to it, indicating that the carp Yao was not to go forward. The carp Yao, its face set in an expression of ignorance, rapidly nodded. "Baxia, Suani, Yazi," the Fox Yao said darkly. "Counting Swallow as well, you've killed who knows how many of my, Wu Qiu's, children now." As it spoke, the Fox Yao's voice was actually tinged with grief. "Kong Xian killed my little sister, and now your methods are so brutal. We're all of the Yao tribe, so why must you slaughter our own? Those 3 monsters, were also your children." Hung Jun couldn't believe it. To be accurate, they are the princes of the Great Tang. The Fox Yao's voice suddenly became gentle and dangerous as it continued quietly, "Do you know why Madam Imperial Consort has been without child?" Hung Jun. Even Li Jinglong couldn't help the cold chills that crept up his spine. Wu Qiu continued, "In her lift, she was destined to have 3 children, but with her body, she'll never be fit to give birth to the offspring of humans, unlike your dad. I imagine your mom was also a human, which is how such a vile offspring like you came to be." Li Jinglong's pupils contracted swiftly. Hung Jun couldn't stop breathing heavily as he said, "You killed my father." Wu Qiu lowered its head, observing Hung Jun. The black energy in its eyes cleared, as if there was a ball of black fire burning merrily in them, and it said quietly, "What I saw, was actually, you Hui." When Hung Jun's eyes met that Fox Yao's, he suddenly felt as if he had been struck by lightning as he was suddenly taken into his own memories. "Direnja, I only have this one child." Within the dilapidated brick and tile main hall of the exorcism department, a man supported his young wife with his arm as he held a child's hand in his other, staggering into the room. Young Hung Jun watched dumbly as this scene played out in front of his eyes. Golden light shot out in all directions, and the man holding the sword of wisdom hovered in midair, his body clad in golden armor. His father and his mother on her last breath knelt in front of that floating man. The glowing man lifted up the sword of wisdom. "Hung Jun dash!" Li Jinglong's angry roar pulled Hung Jun back to reality. The sword of wisdom shone with bright light as it swung in front of Hung Jun. With a face full of horror, Hung Jun leaned back and fell backwards onto the ground. Li Jinglong turned, both hands wielding the sword of wisdom as he shielded Hung Jun. He faced the Fox Yao and said angrily, "Wu Qiu, where is the Yao King? Today you will meet your doom. You won't be able to escape from Chang'an again." "The Yao King?" The Fox Yao began to laugh loudly. "Are you speaking of that trash, the Black Jiao? He left a long time ago, and with his power, he only knows how to silently swallow down his humiliation and insults. Today, I am the Yao King dash." The Fox Yao's biting laugh shook the palace as it said harshly, your great tang is almost done for. Just you wait. Li Jinglong. You all, especially you. The Fox Yao's gaze traveled over Li Jinglong to land on Hung Jun, as it spoke, enunciating each word clearly. Kong Xian killed my Yu Zayun, and originally I wanted to take his son's life to untangle the hatred in my heart, but I never expected that it would be on your person. I only hope that you will keep living, because from today onwards, you will live, tormented by every kind of suffering, within the flames of Mara that burn everything to ash. Living will be worse than death, and you will, forever be unable to escape. Who killed my parents? Within that Fox Yao's gaze, Hung Jun could feel a rage in its heart that could no longer be contained. However, Li Jinglong merely lifted his hand, swiping it across horizontally in front of him. His hand shone with white light, which blocked the Fox Yao's stare, and in that instant, Hung Jun calmed down. Hung Jun's voice quavered. Killing your descendants was no one's fault but my own, Li Jinglong said in a deep voice. It has nothing to do with Hung Jun, or with the rest of my colleagues. Even if it's because of this that I suffer the torment of the blazing fires of hell, then let me be the one to bear the burden. Fox Yao. You've done all kinds of evil, and today, the one who should enter hell first is you. Saying this, Li Jinglong readied the sword of wisdom in his hand, rushing completely without fear towards that Fox Yao. That seven-tailed fox let out a wild roar as it swiped its sharp claws down on Li Jinglong. Hung Jun came back to his senses, and with a twitch of the pentacolor sacred light, he blocked that Fox Yao's claws. As the two collided, the Carp Yao took this opportunity to leap over the tall platform, shouting, "Hey, I found her!" While Li Jinglong and Hung Jun were diverting the Fox Yao's attention, the Carp Yao ran up and hugged Yang Yehuan around the throat, grabbing a pinch of Lihun pollen and stuffing it in her nose. Yang Yehuan was only unconscious, and at this moment, under the influence of the Lihun pollen, she suddenly sneezed and began to wake up. When she opened her eyes, which were filled with tears, she saw that her savior was a Carp Yao, whose mouth kept opening and closing. So beautiful! Though the Carp Yao was not human, it still understood enough to admire Yang Yehuan's skin that could be broken with a single breath, and her delicate features. Yang Yehuan's gaze was a little dazed, and she stared into the Carp Yao's eyes for a split second. "Pretty lady, are you all right?" the Carp Yao asked, deeply concerned. Yang Yehuan exclaimed, "Ah, why does this carp know how to speak? Yaogwai! Yaogwai!" Yang Yehuan was greatly frightened, and she hurriedly struggled to rise. A bucket of cold water was splashed over the Carp Yao at this reaction, and it could only say, all right, yes, I am a Yaogwai. Take her away!" Li Jinglong shouted angrily. "Come with me, ba," the Carp Yao could only ask. Wu Qiu was currently fighting with Hung Jun and Li Jinglong, but when it heard the shrill cry, it immediately turned its head, shouting hoarsely, "You're!" In the blink of an eye, Hung Jun's left hand pushed forward, his right hand lifting the glaive as he waved it from its position by his feet to up above his head, sending out an arc of sword light like a crescent moon. Wu Qiu couldn't dodge in time, and it lost another tail. As fresh blood sprayed out, she turned and leapt towards Hung Jun, shouting angrily, "I'll kill you first!" Colliding like that with Wu Qiu, Hung Jun immediately fell off the side of the observation platform. Li Jinglong tossed aside his sword of wisdom as he leapt over to grab Hung Jun's hand. The two of them dangled from the railings, but the Fox Yao opened its mouth, violent flames spewing forth, and the wooden railings on the outskirts of the platform collapsed. Hung Jun let out a loud shout as he and Li Jinglong plummeted down together. But just in that instant, the two of them were cradled by something soft, and Emorigin's voice said, "We're here." Chu Yangxi and A Tai rushed in at the same time. The Grey Wolf, with one leap, sent Li Jinglong and Hung Jun back onto the observation platform, and the members of the exorcism department were once again all gathered together in one place. The Grey Wolf morphed back into Emorigen, and everyone swiftly took their places, trapping the heavily wounded Wu Qiu in the middle of their circle. Fox Yao! Where is the black Jiao? Chu Yongxi asked coldly with a wave of his brush. It should quickly give itself up without a fight, under the dragon subduing tower is where it should return. Fox Yao! Mo Rijin pulled out an arrow and knocked it to his bow, standing tall in the northern corner of the observation platform. Where did you all take the white deer to? Li Jinglong. I see you all have come with ulterior motives, Wu Qiu laughed coldly. Kong Xian's death, the Jiao dragon that escaped from the dragon subduing saint's tower, the white deer that guards over dreams, why don't you all try killing me instead? Your Majesty! Your Majesty dash! Li Longji, the son of heaven sword in hand, stepped up onto the observation platform. The area below the observation platform was packed densely with row upon row of the 6 armies, and behind him, a large group of soldiers knelt with one knee on the ground as they all drew their bows, pointing their arrows at the Fox Yao in the center. Your Majesty! Yang Yahuan cried out bleakly as she leapt over the Carpiao towards Li Longji. Wu Qiu suddenly said, her voice filled with sobs. Did you know? As long as Big Sister can hold out for a little longer, until the sun rises, then you'll be able to. Yang Yahuan's expression was befuddled. She looked at Li Longji, before turning her eyes on Wu Qiu, her voice shaking as she asked, eldest sister. Tears dripped from Wu Qiu's huge eyes, dripping onto the ground. The gathered exorcists all warily watched the Fox Yao. Li Jinglong kept feeling that something wasn't right, but he couldn't put his finger on it, and he instead roared, Fox Yao! What did you do to the imperial consort? But Li Longji lifted one hand, indicating that Yang Yahuan shouldn't move. He slowly walked up front, and when he was about 10 steps distance away from Wu Qiu, he said in a deep voice, Fox Yao, where did you come from? Why do you disturb the lands of my great Tang? Wu Qiu replied quietly, the lady Qiuo you all know has long since died, Li Longji. Insolent, the group of soldiers all admonished as they heard Wu Qiu use the emperor's given name. When you tasted the wondrous delicacies of the world, did you ever consider the lives that ended under your reign? Wu Qiu smiled coldly. Did you think you humans treated us Yao with any compassion? When you gave the order to burn my descendants to death, did you feel even a sliver of regret? The blazing fire that rises into the sky is the resentment within this world. Do I still need a reason for wanting to destroy your great Tang's work? Li Longji said solemnly, monsters and evil beings are evidently not my people, because your hearts are different, so you can never become human. Kill it. Then today, let's bear witness. Wu Qiu howled. How capable the real Son of Heaven is! Your Majesty, be careful dash! Li Jinglong shouted in shock. The Fox Yao pounced towards Li Longji, and everyone present was not quick enough to leap to his rescue. When they all rushed up at the same time, Li Longji blocked in front of himself horizontally with the Son of Heaven sword. Golden light erupted for a fleeting moment, turning into a protective barrier that rushed at the Fox Yao, which flew backwards from the force of the blow. That instant, the shouts of long live continued without ceasing. The Fox Yao panted non-stop as it widened its eyes, staring at Li Longji. Your breaths are numbered. Li Longji couldn't help but breathe heavily after that. Surrender yourself without putting up a fight. Your corpse will be left intact. In this moment, Hung Jun only wanted to ensure that this Fox Yao named Wu Qiu was kept alive so that they could question it properly later. It had controlled Chang'an from behind the scenes for decades, and it knew far too much about internal affairs. We cannot show it mercy, Li Jinglong said. As long as it's alive, then the truth will come out one day like water dripping through stone, but it only has one life. Everyone nodded their heads lightly, and Hung Jun could only go along with them. Upon hearing that, the Fox Yao let out a mournful, wild laugh, as it roared, then come. The instant the Fox Yao let out that harsh howl, its form once again swelling. This time, without needing any commands, all members of the exorcism department went forth. Hung Jun pulled out his glaive, Li Jinglong's sword shone with bright light, Mo Rijin sent forth his 7-nailed arrows, and Chu Yongxi waved his ink brush. In that instant, bright light gathered together on the observation platform, and another of the Fox Yao's tails were broken off. Li Jinglong wielded his sword as he went forward. Black fire billowed along the ground from the Fox Yao's eyes, but it was dissolved wherever the light of Li Jinglong's sword touched. With one wave of Chu Yongxi's large brush, the constellations on the observation platform all left the wood that they were on, and the carvings and drawn dragons all rushed towards the Fox Yao. Mo Rijin's 7-nailed arrows shot towards the Fox Yao, before he turned back into the grey wolf and leapt onto its back. The Fox Yao howled painfully as blazing fire issued forth from its mouth, but just then, a whirlwind of ice and snow rushed forward, blocking the burning flames that it spewed. In midair, Hung Jun first blocked with the pentacolor sacred light, before he closed his stance and turned, slicing down with the glaive. It has 3 left. Hung Jun roared. The Fox Yao had consecutively lost multiple tails as it landed in a pool of blood, its power growing weaker and weaker. In that instant, Hung Jun watched her mutely, as his heart was suddenly moved at the sight. But in the next instant, a bird's cry echoed through the sky. Black clouds broke apart layer by layer, revealing the bright glow of the rising sun. A huge peng with a pair of wings that easily spanned 10 zhang, bathed in golden splendor, circled in the sky as it cried, before shooting down in a dive from the air. Right after, the huge peng's wing beats created a windstorm as hawks, falcons, eagles, and other large birds appeared like a cresting wave that rushed towards the observation platform of Xingqing Palace. The Fox Yao turned to escape, rushing towards Li Jinglong, but with a block, Li Jinglong stabbed the sword of wisdom straight into its throat. As the Fox Yao yelled, it backed up incessantly. Just as Li Jinglong was about to shout "Protect His Majesty," the golden-winged Great Peng had already rushed down to the observation platform. With its 2 great claws, it lifted the Fox Yao into the air, soaring towards the horizon. Thousands of shouts issued forth from human throats, and even Li Longji couldn't help the change in his expression as the golden-winged Great Peng lifted the Fox Yao and tossed it into the air. The birds of prey swarmed it, and the sky was filled with a dense flock of birds that took turns attacking the Fox Yao. The Fox Yao's pained cries echoed to the horizon and back, before it finally exploded into a fine mist of blood. The flock of birds then dissipated, and the golden-winged Great Peng let out another cry before it turned in an arc and rose into the clouds. The flock of birds soared in their own circles before they, following the example of the golden-winged Great Peng, flew through the cloud layer, and like troops following their general, they all disappeared in a great flood. Everything happened in such a short moment. Fur and blood rained down from the sky, the remnants of the Fox Yao after it had been torn apart, as if a bloody battle had just taken place. Everyone's faces were covered in blood as they stood dumbly in front of the observation platform, and as Hung Jun reached a hand out, a tuft of white fur landed in his palm. Li Jinglong wobbled unsteadily as he planted his sword of wisdom on the ground, leaning against the railings, letting out a long sigh. "Zhenji, look," Chu Yongxi murmured. The red sun rose, shining over the observation platform. The morning bell had yet to ring, and under the glow of the sunlight, the Yao energy over the entirety of Chang'an dissipated. As soon as Wu Qiu died, thousands of Yaogwei streamed out of the 8 gates of Chang'an like a massive flood. The members of the exorcism department stood at the front of the observation platform, looking over Chang'an. This 1,000-year capital seemed to have taken on a fresh new visage. "Zhenji, any thoughts you'd like to share?" A Tai smiled. "This battle that we fought was a very long one." Li Jinglong had no more energy left in him, and he didn't want to think about anything more. He turned to look towards Hung Jun, reaching a hand out to stroke his head as Hung Jun looked towards the direction that the golden-winged Great Peng had left in. In his heart, he suddenly missed Qingxiang and Changming very much. He hadn't expected Qingxiang to show up at this moment. His nose soured, and tears welled up in his eyes, but still he sent a smile towards Li Jinglong. End chapter. Legend of Exorcism. Chapter 38. The Princess Li of Tang. One day and night later, within the bedchambers in Xingqing Palace, Yang Yahuan had slept deeply for a whole night, and now she slowly began to wake. "Are you feeling a little better now?" Hung Jun's voice sounded by her ear. Hung Jun had changed into a sky-blue martial robe, and now he sat by the bedside. He looked like a beautiful piece of jade, or a jade tree in the wind. In this instant, he was using his slightly chilly index and middle fingers, pressing them against Yang Yahuan's neck. The azure jade peacock plume emitted pulses of light as the pentacolor sacred light circulated through Yang Yahuan's body. The members of the exorcism department were worried that Lady Qiaoqiao had done something to her body. In that last, chaotic battle, the Fox Yao's words appeared straightforward, but they had left behind too many riddles in the end. Hung Jun said to Li Jinglong and the rest gathered in front of the bed, "I can't sense any Yao energy." Everyone finally let out a breath at that. Li Longji then continued, "Qiaoshong is in Hebei right now, and a detailed account of the matter must be made, so that he can get a proper explanation as well." Yang Yahuan remembered what had happened, and 2 trails of clear tears trickled down her face as she asked, Where is my eldest sister? What do you remember?" Hung Jun handed a glass bowl to a eunuch as he said, "Put the medicine in this bowl." Yang Yahuan's memories were spotty, and she could only vaguely remember that she saw a fox Yao and had a very long dream. Her memories, scattered like broken shards, caused her to have no ability to recount the series of events that had happened. "It's probably the effect of the Lihun pollen," Li Jinglong explained to Li Longji. "I remember that a carp Yao saved my life," Yang Yahuan exclaimed. "Where is that fish now?" "Everyone." Li Longji had said before that whoever saved Yang Yahuan would be given a promotion in office and appointed a higher rank, but he hadn't expected that Yang Yahuan would actually recognize a carp Yao with hairy legs as the Yao that had saved her, so this became an awkward affair. "It's my good friend, Zhao Zilong," Hung Jun said. "Some other day, I'll introduce you to, but now, come, drink this medicine ba. After you drink it, everything will be all right." Hung Jun held that glass bowl in his hand as Li Longji went forward, supporting Yang Yahuan into sitting up, but Yang Yahuan stared fixedly at Hung Jun. "Hung Jun." The Hung Jun in Yang Yahuan's eyes was radiant with youth, his lips red, his teeth white, his brows black and arched like the distant mountains. His eyes were like evening stars, his nose bridge high and straight, his skin white and fair, his fingers long and slender. Those eyes held a hint of a twinkling smile. Your surname is Kong?" Yang Yahuan asked curiously. "Who is Kong Xian to you?" In that instant, a solemn silence fell over the hall. Hung Jun's hand trembled incessantly, and some of the medicine inside actually spilled out. He forced himself to calm down as he asked, "You know my dad? You're Kong Xian's son?" Yang Yahuan grabbed Hung Jun's wrist with one hand, asking, "Where are your parents?" "Beloved consort," Li Longji hurried to interject. "You should rest well, this matter can wait until later." Hung Jun's eyes were tinged with shock as he looked at Yang Yahuan, then at Li Longji. Yang Yahuan turned her head and said to Li Longji, "Dr. Kong. Your Majesty. Do you still remember? 16 years ago, when this subject had a strange illness. The person who saved me then was Dr. Kong." Li Jinglong glanced at Hung Jun, and the hall was filled with silence unbroken by even a bird call. Li Longji replied, "There does seem to have been such a person, and in the past Zhen heard Mao speak of him before, n." Li Longji hesitated for a long while, but Yang Yahuan smiled. "Your mother is Jiayu's. Are your parents still well?" "They've both passed away," Hung Jun said dejectedly. Yang Yahuan was still for a long while without making a noise, but Li Jinglong spoke up from behind Hung Jun. "All the citizens of the world are your Majesty's subjects, and being able to share some of the cares of the Emperor and the Imperial Consort is just one of their many duties." Hung Jun, the imperial consort is tired, let her have a good rest ba. Li Jinglong understood that Li Longji wasn't willing to bring up past matters very often. After all, Yang Yahuan had once been his son's wife, and such a thing was still considered a little against the order of things, so he called Hung Jun over to his side. Hung Jun then said, "When you're a little better, we can speak then." Li Longji nodded his head, sending them away. In the side palace, everyone let loose a sigh of relief. While getting rid of the Yao last night, thankfully Xingqing Palace hadn't been reduced to a pile of rubble. None of the members of the exorcism department returned to their headquarters, they all found places in the palace to lay their heads down and sleep. The moment they woke, they ate, then bathed, changed their clothes, and as the afternoon sun shone down, Li Longji specially allowed the group to rest within the tea room as they waited. He himself went to hold a court session to deal with the series of questions that had sprung up in these past days. Before that, Li Jinglong had been kept at Li Longji's side the entire time to speak with the officials who entered the court. First it was the Judiciary Department, then the Ministry of Justice, and after that, the commander of the 6 armies. It wasn't until this moment that he had a chance to breathe. Thankfully the impact of last night's events isn't widespread, Li Jinglong said. At the present moment, we can contain it as it is, and the citizens of Chang'an are unaware of what has happened. There's too much that they shouldn't know, so have them all sniff a little Lihun pollen and it'll be fine, Chu Yangxi smiled. That golden-winged great peng that appeared in the end really came from who knows where. Hui, Mo Rijin said. Like a god descending from the heavens. The Carpiao was sprawled out by Hung Jun's feet as it slept, but when it heard those words, it lifted its gaze warily, shooting a look towards Hung Jun. Hung Jun faltered, but thankfully the rest of them didn't notice his strange reaction as they tirelessly discussed the golden-winged great peng's appearance. The golden-winged great peng was a godly bird from legends, and it held great renown amongst the common citizens of the Great Tang. In the end, the general consensus was that that bird was once the protective deity of the Tang royal family, and after the Fox Yao took over Chang'an, it had left, but after the exorcism department's continued efforts, it had finally returned to once again watch over the Great Tang. Was it like that? Even Hung Jun himself didn't know that Qingxiang had such an impressive background, and it was as if Yao were also split into 2 kinds, ones with good reputations, and ones with bad. When twilight came, Li Longji had yet to let the group return. It wasn't until they had eaten dinner and the emperor had taken his meal that an eunuch came with a message: His Majesty would meet them in the Jinhu Luo. The eunuch then lit their way with a lantern as he led everyone towards the side palace. It was the beginning of winter, and within Jinhu Luo, the 400-year-old ginkgo had already shed all its leaves, standing bare in the middle of the pond. That huge screen in Jinhu Luo was as open and splendid as ever, but the scenery had changed to one of snow falling gently. Behind the screen, a person's silhouette was gently plucking at the strings of a qin in ones and twos, like a clear spring in the midst of the snow, causing the listeners to feel relaxed and carefree. The 5 of them sat down on the same seats that Li Jinglong and Hung Jun had sat on last time. Chu Yangxi and Mo Rijin were still discussing the matter of who would win if the Jiao dragon fought with the golden-winged great peng. In the next moment, a cry came from outside, "The Crown Prince has arrived!" Li Jinglong hadn't expected that the Crown Prince would come, and he hurriedly rose to welcome him as a tall, skinny, dark-skinned middle-aged man strode in swiftly. He reached out a hand to gently pat Li Jinglong's shoulder as he smiled. "Jinglong! Your Highness!" Li Jinglong was evidently shocked and delighted. That person was indeed the great Tang Crown Prince Li Hung. When Li Linfu had been in power, Li Hung had been squeezed out of the capital, instead heading out to lead troops in the field. Last year, after Li Linfu had been deposed, Li Hung finally was able to get rid of the biggest calamity weighing down his heart, and with one less enemy, he could finally lift his head high again. Li Longji then made him the Crown Prince and called him back to Chang'an. The King of De has arrived. The King of Shao has arrived. Back then, before Li Hung left the capital, he had met Li Jinglong on multiple occasions. The Longwu army that Li Jinglong was in often accompanied Li Hung to the Li hunting grounds to hunt game, and back then Li Jinglong had felt that Li Hung was a superior who was appreciative of his abilities. Li Hung, on the other hand, had a strong impression of this young man who had spent his entire family fortune to buy a single sword. And before, Li Jinglong had even had the thought of following Li Hung to the northeastern front to fight. However, because Li Hung had needed to ensure his own safety, he had no time to discuss all this in depth with Li Jinglong before he had rushed away from Chang'an. "Yo, who is this?" Li Hung saw Hung Jun behind Li Jinglong, so he turned his head that way and smiled. "His looks put our entire families to shame." The king of De Liyan and the king of Shao Li Mao came in together, and the members of the exorcism department hurried to greet them. Li Mao resembled his mother, imperial consort Wu, his features handsome and delicate, but he lacked a bit of iron and yang. Li Yan had the air of a martial artist, but the space between his brows had a faint aura of fruitlessness. "Our imperial father ordered us to come first, to get a little closer with Jinglong," Li Yan said. "Without even knowing it, we actually slept through such an earth-shaking event last night. Your Highnesses have the protection of the true dragon's power," Li Jinglong hurried to say. "Normal Yao and evils naturally cannot withstand it." As they spoke, both sides sat down in the proper order. Hung Jun observed the crown prince. Seeing that he wore a bracelet of nephrite jade beads, each bead as white as mutton fat and as uniform as its brethren, the light glistening off it, Hung Jun felt very close with him. He said, "These beads of yours, when I was small." Li Hung noticed his expression, and he smiled. "Do you like them? I'll give this to you." Saying this, Li Hung took off the bracelet and had a servant hand it to Hung Jun. At this, Li Jinglong's expression changed minutely, but just as Hung Jun was about to refuse politely, Li Jinglong, feeling that while accepting it was not possible, not accepting it was out of the question as well, so he could only say to Hung Jun, "Aren't you going to give your thanks?" Li Heng's set of nephrite beads were called the Godly Tears of Tian Shan, and they had been given to him as a gift 10 years ago, when Gao Xianzi had personally led a campaign to the Jidi-Su River Basin, and the Karluks had been assigned officials' roles. In these years, Li Hung had loved this string of beads so much that he never untied them, and they never left his person. Hung Jun's next words of "when I was small, I played marbles with a set of beads exactly like these" were stifled in his throat, and he could only accept them with 2 hands, hurriedly saying, "Thank you." The princes exchanged multiple conventional greetings with each other, each with their own style. From those words, it could be seen that they hadn't met for a long time, but all of them treated Li Hung as the leader. As soon as Li Hung spoke, everyone else fell silent. Seeing this, Hung Jun couldn't help but think of the words Lady Qiaoqiao had spoken before her death: if Yang Yehuan also bore children, then perhaps they might be a little younger than them. Would they have been sitting here as well? After defeating the Fox Yao, Chu Yangxi had also analyzed the situation. Though he didn't know what magic the Fox Yao had used, it must have been an extremely cruel, evil art, to make Yang Yehuan bear Li Longji's child 3 times, but have no way to give birth successfully to any of them. To this, Li Jinglong's deduction was, Lady Qiaoqiao didn't want Yang Yehuan to give birth to one of Li Longji's princelings, perhaps because if that happened, an unknown variable would come into play. But all of this, with the Fox Yao's death, became an eternal mystery. However, it was exactly because of this that Li Heng's position as crown prince would no longer be threatened by any danger. "Father is still debating matters," Li Hung smiled. "Jinglong, tell us what exactly happened." So Li Jinglong began to detail what had happened from the beginning, including the case with the imperial examination the princes did not know about. As he was vividly describing the details of the happenings, just when he was halfway through, Li Longji arrived. Indicating that the group did not need to be overly polite, he took a seat and listened to Li Jinglong recounting the events. When he finished, the princes' faces were filled with shock. "This," Li Heng exclaimed to Li Longji, "I didn't know it was this dangerous." Chu Yangxi said, "Though it's said that the evil Yao were wreaking havoc, the heavens looked favorably upon my great Tang, and in the last moment, a golden-winged great Peng swooped down from the sky, an arrival of an auspicious omen." "True," Li Longji said after a long sigh. "Zhen personally bore witness to the great Peng." Hung Jun thought, thankfully it wasn't Chongming who had come then, otherwise they'd have to bustle about for 3 days and 3 nights just to put out all the fire. Li Heng and the others nodded their heads, but confusion appeared in their eyes. Evidently, they didn't believe it, and they bore expressions of what in the world. But because Li Longji believed this matter, they could only go along with him. After this time, Li Longji's expression seemed to have become even more exhausted, and after listening, he just managed to lift his spirits a little as he said, "In the end, it was a carp that saved your honored mother, the imperial consort." A carp. Li Yan and Li Mao hadn't yet surfaced from the "you're kidding me" thoughts, so they merely nodded unconsciously. Li Mao said, "A carp is pretty good. It's a good fish." After Li Heng finished listening to that entire long string of things, with Fox Yao and Ao fish and a bunch of other monsters, he didn't know how to respond at all, and he could only nod along. Li Longji then asked, "Where is the fish?" "Zhao Zilong," Hung Jun turned his head and called. "They're asking for you." The carp Yao stuck its head out from behind the table. Its mouth moved a little, and it took a look at the nephrite beads that Hung Jun had placed on the table, before looking at the princes, and in that instant the interior of Jinhu Luo was filled with silence. The carp Yao said, "Upon seeing injustice, I merely drew my weapon to assist, so no need to be polite." Wah! The 3 princes were greatly startled. Cups of tea were overturned in the commotion, nearly drawing the guards over as well, but Li Longji began to laugh loudly, saying, "So, now do you all believe this?" Li Heng was still a little apprehensive as he lowered his head to look at the carp Yao, but he swiftly recovered his calm, and he nodded. "Now I believe it." In front of the Suand gates, Zhen did promise before that whoever was to save the imperial consort would be rewarded with an official's position. Li Longji said, "What do you want? Speak ba." The carp Yao suddenly thought of something, and it spoke. "No need for an official's position, having a carp be an official would be a pretty strange sight. There is just one thing I'd like to ask of you, Your Majesty. I once was indebted to someone, but now they've died, and I heard that Xingjiao Temple has kept many of his Buddhist relics. Can you give me one in memory of him?" "Naturally." Li Longji then said to Li Heng, "In a few days, you may go carry out this task on its behalf." "Yes, yes," Li Heng hurriedly nodded as he used his sleeve to wipe away his sweat. Li Yan and Li Mao were still looking at the carp Yao with uncontrolled horror. The carp Yao stuck its head into Hung Jun's cup of tea and took a few sips. It was used to such gazes from the humans, and afterwards it shrank back underneath the table, lying back down next to Hung Jun's feet. Li Longji then said, "Naturally, Jinglong's efforts to exterminate the Yao cannot be denied, and starting tomorrow, the exorcism department's members will be promoted accordingly. You will also be granted a portion of territory, which you may choose yourself when the time comes." Li Jinglong hurried to once again bow and thank His Majesty. Li Longji said to Li Heng, "Originally, the exorcism department was under Quozhong's command, but starting tonight, it will be yours to command." Everyone understood that Li Longji, upon seeing the exorcism department's exceptional abilities, couldn't feel secure leaving it in an outsider's hands. They had to remain within the command of the Li clan, to give their lives for the royal family. Now that they had been directly handed over to the Crown Prince, and in most matters they would have to listen to the Crown Prince, the Emperor could finally sleep soundly at night. "There is one matter I would like to inquire about," Li Heng said. "Jinglong, in the Chang'an of today, are there still Yao, and how many?" After Li Jinglong thought for a long moment, he said, "There are basically no more left, but whether none of them are left at all, it's hard to say. Everyone looked at each other. In reality, the members of the exorcism department had already split up yesterday to investigate in every area of the city. Last night, after discussing it over and over again on the observation platform, it seemed as though Chang'an was no longer like how it had been before, where it felt as if a cloud enshrouded the entire city. With the Yao King's death, the Yaoguai, both big and small, must have scattered after seeing the tree fall, and they had completely deserted the city. Origin said, the return of the golden-winged Great Peng is the strongest piece of evidence. Though we do not know where it is hiding today, there shouldn't be any strange occurrences in the short term. Wu, Li Longji nodded. Inside the Dacian temple is painted a mural of a Garuda, which is the godly bird that protects the country and destroys all evil, and now that it has returned, it is true that there is no more need to worry. All right, so be it. Today, Li Longji was clearly not in the mood to discuss such things, because he had to go back to watch over Yang Yahuan, so everyone rose to see him off. After the emperor left, Li Jinglong then chatted for a little longer about everything and nothing with the princes. Seeing that everyone's hearts were not in it, Li Heng ended the meeting early. As they left Jinhu Luo, he personally saw Li Jinglong and the rest of the department in a line trailing after him off outside of the main palace of Xingqing Palace. Last night, it had rained, and right now the night sky was filled with starry brilliance, the Milky Way like a belt, its stars glimmering over the land. After the Fox Yao's execution, the atmosphere of Chang'an had indeed changed greatly. Your Highness, Li Jinglong turned and said, though the exorcism department wields remarkable powers, we are unable to fight mortals who are not familiar with magic, so please forgive us for that. That is natural, Li Heng smiled. Today, Father specially ordered that you all should not be doing such unbefitting things as assassinations. However, I hope that there will never be a day that this sharp sword that is the exorcism department will need to leave its sheath. Li Jinglong replied mildly, hopefully, it will be so. And saying this, Li Jinglong and Li Heng made their farewells to each other, both of them having reached a tacit understanding. The exorcism department headed by Li Jinglong would be loyal to the future emperor of the Great Tang, and the crown prince would give thanks to the exorcism department for having saved his entire family. With that, the two of them each left the plaza. It feels like there's no more Yao energy, it's really different, Heng Jun smiled. Origin replied, speaking of it, it's strange, now the night sky looks exactly like how it does on the grasslands. The carp Yao, from behind Heng Jun's back, replied, when the Yao energy enveloped Chang'an, various stars went dark, the guest stars opposed the master, and there was an energy of conflict. Now that the Yao King is dead, the spiritual energy of the usual stars has naturally grown stronger. As the group walked through the courtyard, just as they were about to leave the meridian gates behind, Origin sucked in a few breaths of fresh air and said, we just don't know the Black Jiao's whereabouts. Chu Yongxi sent a look to Origin, but even this small movement couldn't escape Li Jinglong's eyes. He asked, what's wrong? Let's talk about this in a few days, Chu Yongxi smiled. There are some things that need to be discussed at length. Li Jinglong didn't continue asking about it either, merely nodding his head. Suddenly, a carriage rushed over, stopping in front of the meridian gates, and a person climbed off. It was Li Longji. Your Majesty! Li Jinglong exclaimed, surprised. Accompany Zhen for a stroll, Li Longji said. Kong Heng Jun, the imperial consort has a few things to ask you. The rest of them, understanding how to behave in this delicate situation, left the palace. Li Longji took Li Jinglong along as they walked around the outskirts of the meridian gates towards the plaza, and Heng Jun, after letting the carp Yao go back with Origin, climbed into the carriage alone. Within the carriage, there was a lit brazier, and Yang Yahuan sat there, wrapped in a large fur cloak, staring off into space. As soon as she saw Heng Jun, she began to smile faintly. His Majesty doesn't like it when I bring up the past, Yang Yahuan said warmly. As long as you're just listening, it's all right, but don't speak of it often. Hung Jun asked, why is that? I was just about to ask you. Yang Yahuan began to smile, and she said, you were raised in a sheltered environment since you were young, so you do not understand much about dealing with the world, right? And saying this, she used her hand to stroke Hung Jun's ear, asking, and what happened here? Where did you get this wound? Hung Jun turned his head, rubbing at the edges of his injured ear as he replied, it's nothing, when I was young I kept bumping into things, so in comparison, 'tis but a flesh wound. Yang Yahuan let out a sigh, before beginning to inquire after Hung Jun's family. Hung Jun spoke simply of some of it, before Yang Yahuan said, and that's to say, after Yuz and Dr. Kong passed away, you lived in the mountains for 12 years. What kind of people were my parents? Hung Jun already had no memory of his father or mother. Like pearls and jade complementing each other, Yang Yahuan said warmly. A golden man and a jade-like woman, a pair of great beauty. Your mother was a woman of the Huayanjia family, and she and I once came as companions to Chang'an to attend Princess Xianyi's wedding. Not long after, Luoyang, Hungnong, Xikang, and the surrounding regions were all struck with a plague, and your dad used his medical skills to help the people. He saved the lives of many citizens. Yang Yahuan lifted her gaze to look at Hung Jun, who thought deeply for a moment. As he remembered the words that Lady Kuo had spoken before she died, in the end he didn't feel relieved, so he pressed his fingers against Yang Yahuan's pulse point. As for my big sister's matters, His Majesty already told me everything, Yang Yahuan said quietly. Do you know when exactly she came to my side, Hung Jun? Hung Jun's brows furrowed deeply as he once again used the pentacolor sacred light to search through Yang Yahuan's meridians. Unlike Li Jinglong, Yang Yahuan did not practice martial arts, and her meridians were as empty as air, not rejecting the touch of his pentacolor sacred light. Do you remember when you saw anything strange? Hung Jun held that hand as he placed one foot on the footrest of the horse cart, turning his head as he asked Yang Yahuan the question. When I was young, I once saw a white fox, Yang Yahuan said after pondering. It was the year I turned 14. A white fox? Hung Jun suddenly felt a sense of unease. It wasn't grey. Yang Yahuan nodded her head and continued, afterwards, after I married Li Mao, I was gravely ill for a time. I suffered in my dreams, and my high fever would not fade. Just before I fell ill, your father and mother suddenly came to the manor. They said that soon a disaster would befall me, and there was only one method to save my life. What method? Hung Jun asked. Yang Yahuan furrowed her brows. On my back, he used some medicine to draw a sigil, and he said that that would be able to deter Yao and devils. It was as if a bolt of lightning shot through Hung Jun's mind, and he could dimly deduce what had happened then. End chapter.